He learned how to stand quietly between danger and the people who needed him, even when no one noticed. She learned too late what it meant when someone stayed. Between a child's steady gaze and a morning that changed everything, something fragile refused to disappear. Stay a little longer. Let the silence tell you why. The evening had been planned down to the minute. Every light in the atrium burned with deliberate warmth. Every glass surface polished until it reflected authority back onto itself. People moved as if they had rehearsed their steps measured, smiling, alert. He stood near the edge of it all, where the marble floor met the quieter corridor, hands folded loosely in front of him, eyes attentive but unremarkable. He had learned long ago that stillness could be useful. From where he stood, he could see her only in fragments. The clean line of her jacket when she turned, the precise tilt of her head as she listened. She was surrounded, always advisors, executives, security, but there was a hollow at the center of that circle, a space no one quite entered. He did not try to look important enough to belong there. He watched for movement instead, for imbalance. The tension arrived before the sound did. A subtle shift in the room, like a held breath. Conversations faltered. Someone near the entrance raised their voice, sharp with accusation rather than volume. A reporter, uninvited, emboldened by numbers and proximity. Words began to land where they were not meant to. Speculation dressed as concern. A question shaped like a blade. Security moved, but too late and too carefully. The situation had crossed that thin line where restraint could be mistaken for weakness. He stepped forward without thinking. It was not bravery. It was timing. He had been watching the angle of approach, the tightening circle, the way her shoulders stiffened almost imperceptibly. He positioned himself between her and the noise, not touching her, not addressing her, simply occupying the space that had opened. When the next question came, it hit him instead. He absorbed it, redirected it, answered nothing at all. For a moment, the room recalibrated around him. Someone told him to move. He did not. Another voice suggested protocol. He stayed where he was, posture calm, expression neutral, eyes steady. He did not argue or explain. He waited. Eventually, security found their footing and closed the distance properly. The reporter was escorted away. The questions scattered, unfinished. The damage, however, lingered. When it was over, the event continued as if nothing had happened. Music resumed. Laughter returned, a shade too loud. She addressed the room with practiced ease, voice level, gaze forward. Only once did her eyes flick toward him, not gratitude, not recognition. Something quieter, as if she were registering a fact she had not accounted for. He returned to his place near the corridor. Later, when the evening began to thin and people drifted toward exits and cars waiting with engines running, he was called aside. The request came politely, but with an edge he recognized. He followed without resistance. In a smaller room, away from glass and light, he was informed that his actions had been noticed, that he had acted outside his role, that there would be consequences to consider. He listened. He nodded once. He did not defend himself. When he left the building, the night air felt cooler than expected. He walked to the bus stop instead of the parking structure, the city humming around him with its usual indifference. He did the math quietly in his head rent. Groceries, school supplies. Adjustments could be made. They always were. At home, the lights were low. The apartment smelled faintly of soap and something warm from dinner earlier. A small backpack rested by the door. He hung his jacket carefully, as if noise might matter. In the bedroom, his son slept curled toward the wall, one hand clutching the corner of the blanket. He stood there for a moment longer than necessary. The child shifted slightly but did not wake. His breathing was even. Safe. That, more than anything, settled the day into place. He turned away and moved to the rest of the apartment with practiced quiet, washing his hands, setting out clothes for the morning. Across the city, she sat alone in the back of a car that cost more than his yearly salary, watching the lights slide past the tinted windows. The silence inside the vehicle pressed close. For the first time that night, there was no one asking her questions, no one waiting for instruction. She found herself thinking not of the accusation or the headlines that would come regardless, but of the man who had stood where he did not belong and refused to step aside. She did not yet know why it stayed with her. She arrived without ceremony. There was no motorcade this time, no assistant stepping out first to scan the street. The car that brought her was anonymous, its engine quiet as it pulled away. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment after it left, coat drawn close, taking in the building as if it were a question she had not expected to answer. It was smaller than she had imagined, older, the kind of place people passed every day without noticing. He opened the door before she knocked. Not because he had been waiting, but because he had heard the unfamiliar footsteps pause outside. He registered her presence the same way he always did, quickly, without surprise. His expression did not change much when he saw her. If anything, it softened slightly, the way it did when a situation required care rather than control. "Come in," he said, stepping aside. The apartment was warm. Not overly so, but lived in. The kind of warmth that came from radiators working hard and curtains drawn early. Shoes were lined neatly by the wall. The child's drawing was taped just above the light switch, edges curling. The smell of food lingered, simple, steady, unremarkable. She hesitated before crossing the threshold, as if unsure whether she had earned the right to. Inside, the space unfolded modestly. A small kitchen to the left, a couch that had seen better days but had been cleaned carefully. A table with 2 chairs, one of them smaller. Nothing about it asked to impress. Everything about it suggested routine. He took her coat without comment and hung it where there was room. He did not offer a tour. He did not apologize for the space. He moved as if the apartment were an extension of his body, known, trusted. "My son's finishing homework," he said quietly, already heading toward the kitchen. "He'll say hello when he's done." She nodded, though he wasn't looking. She sat where he gestured, hands folded loosely in her lap. The chair creaked beneath her weight, a sound that made her flinch before she could stop herself. She waited for embarrassment to follow. It did not. He did not notice, or chose not to. From the next room came the faint sound of a pencil being set down. Small footsteps. A pause. The child appeared in the doorway slowly, eyes curious rather than shy. He studied her the way children often do, openly, without pretense. She met his gaze and did not look away. "This is her," the boy said, not asking a question. "Yes," his father replied, "this is her." The child considered that. Then he nodded once, satisfied, and returned to his work. The exchange was brief, but something in her chest tightened and did not release. Dinner was simple. Soup reheated carefully, bread warmed just enough. They ate at the table together, the 3 of them. Conversation minimal but not strained. The child talked about school in fragments. A science project. A spelling test. His father listened with full attention, responding when needed, never interrupting. She watched more than she spoke. There was a steadiness to the way he moved through the meal, refilling a glass before it was empty. Cutting bread without looking, glancing toward his son at regular intervals as if checking a rhythm only he could hear. It was not performative. It was practiced. Afterward, the child cleared his plate without being asked. "Bath," he announced, already heading down the hall. His father acknowledged this with a nod and began rinsing dishes. She stood to help, then stopped, uncertain. He noticed, finally, and handed her a towel. They worked in quiet coordination. The sink ran. The clock ticked softly above the doorway. There was no rush to fill the silence. "I didn't have to come," she said eventually. Not as a defense, as a statement. "No," he agreed. "You didn't." She dried a plate, slowly. "You still opened the door." "Yes." That was all. Later, the child emerged in pajamas, hair damp, eyes already heavy. He paused when he saw her still there. "You can come back," he said, as if offering something he had already decided to give. She smiled then. Not the kind she used in boardrooms or interviews. Something smaller. "Okay." When the child went to bed, the apartment grew quieter still. She stood near the window while he turned off lights, leaving only one lamp on in the living room. The city outside was muted at this height, its noise softened by distance. She realized then that she felt safe. Not protected, not hidden. Safe in the way that came from being allowed to exist without expectation. He joined her near the window, not close enough to touch. "This isn't permanent," he said, not unkindly. "I know." But neither of them moved to end the evening just yet. The days that followed did not announce themselves as important. They arrived quietly, one after another, shaped by ordinary needs. Mornings began early in the apartment. He woke before the alarm, as he always did, moving through the dark with practiced ease. Coffee brewed softly. Lunches were packed with care but little variation. By the time the child padded into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from his eyes, the day had already found its footing. She did not appear every day. When she did, it was without advance notice. Her arrival folded into the rhythm rather than interrupting it. Sometimes she came in the early evening, coat still on, shoulders slightly drawn as if bracing against something unseen. Other times she arrived later, after dinner, when the apartment was dimmer and the world outside had already slowed. He never asked why. She never explained. The child accepted her presence with an ease that unsettled her. He did not treat her as special, nor did he avoid her. He simply made room, the way children do when they sense sincerity. He offered updates about his day without prompting, asked her to hold the page steady while he erased a mistake. Once he handed her a crayon and waited, expectant, until she sat beside him on the floor. She complied, awkward at first, then less so. They did not speak much about themselves. Conversation moved around safer things. The weather turning colder, a leaky faucet that would need attention, a book the child was reading aloud in uneven chapters. He listened the same way he always did, with his full attention anchored in the present moment. She found herself adjusting to that, slowing down without realizing she had been rushing. Evenings settled into patterns. Dinner was often simple, sometimes eaten together, sometimes in shifts depending on schedules she never detailed. Afterward, the child did homework at the table while she read quietly on the couch, or helped test spelling words. He moved between rooms, checking, tidying, ensuring nothing frayed at the edges. She noticed the small things, the way he always checked the lock twice before bed, how he kept his phone face down when he was home, how he never raised his voice, even when the child tested boundaries in small, harmless ways. One night, after the child had gone to sleep, she remained seated at the table, hands wrapped around a mug she had not finished. "You don't ask questions," she said. He considered that. "I listen," he replied. "There's a difference." She nodded slowly. "Most people don't wait." He did not respond. He was wiping the counter, a motion repeated so often it had become meditative. When he finished, he sat across from her, leaving the space between them intact. "You're used to being needed," she said. More observation than inquiry. "Yes, and you don't mind." He looked toward the hallway where the child slept. "I mind when it's unsafe," he said quietly. "This isn't." Something in her expression shifted then. Not relief, recognition. The world outside continued its noise regardless of what was happening inside the apartment. Articles were written. Meetings were held. Her name appeared in places she avoided reading. She navigated it all with the same competence she always had. But something had loosened. The sharpness dulled. The urgency softened. She began to linger. Sometimes she stayed long enough to help pack lunches for the next day. Sometimes she sat on the couch while he folded laundry, the television on low, neither of them truly watching. Once, she fell asleep there, head tilted awkwardly against the armrest, exhaustion finally overtaking restraint. He covered her with a blanket and did not wake her. In the morning, she left before the child stirred, leaving the blanket folded neatly and a note on the counter with no explanation beyond a simple thank you. He read it, then set it aside, returning to the rhythm of the day. Nothing was named, but something was being built, slowly, in the spaces between evenings, where expectation gave way to presence and silence was allowed to do its work. As the weeks passed, the apartment began to register her presence in small, unremarkable ways. An extra mug appeared in the drying rack more often than not. A second toothbrush remained in the cup by the sink, unused but not removed. The child started setting out 3 plates without thinking, his movements confident in their assumption. No one commented on these changes. They existed without permission, sustained by repetition. She adjusted her schedule without announcing it. Meetings ended earlier. Calls were taken in the car instead of at the office. She arrived with her phone already silenced, slipping it into her bag as if it belonged to a different life. He noticed but did not remark on it. He had learned not to draw attention to the things people gave quietly. One evening, the child asked her to read. The request was simple, delivered without ceremony. He sat cross-legged on the couch, book open, waiting. She hesitated only a moment before taking it from him, her fingers lingering on the worn cover as if it carried weight beyond its pages. Her voice was steady, if slightly unfamiliar with the task. She read slowly, careful with each word. The child leaned against her side without asking, his head resting lightly against her arm. She stiffened at first, then relaxed, adjusting her posture so he could settle more comfortably. From the kitchen, he watched without intrusion. There was something deliberate in the way she read, in attention to cadence, to pause. When the chapter ended, the child yawned and closed the book himself, already half asleep. "Tomorrow," he said, not opening his eyes. "Yes," she replied, surprising herself with how easily the word came. Later, after the child had been put to bed and the lights dimmed, she stood near the sink, rinsing her mug. He leaned against the counter, arms folded loosely, his gaze unfocused but present. "You don't treat me differently here," she said. He considered that. "I treat you like you are," he answered. "Not what you do." She turned the mug in her hands. "That's rare. It shouldn't be." "No," she agreed, "but it is." There were moments when the difference between their worlds pressed closer, uninvited. A call she took on the balcony, voice low, controlled. A car waiting longer than expected outside the building. A glance she gave her reflection in the darkened window, as if checking whether she still recognized herself. Each time, she returned inside with visible effort, setting the weight down where it would not be felt by the child. He noticed the restraint in her, the way she chose her words carefully when the child was within earshot. How she deferred to his routines without question. How she waited for his cue before stepping into moments that mattered. Trust did not arrive all at once. It accumulated. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, the child spread his homework across the table, frustration evident in the tight set of his shoulders. He pushed the paper away and crossed his arms. "I don't get it," he muttered. She knelt beside him without looking to his father first. She studied the problem, then began explaining, her tone patient, precise. The child listened, eyes tracking her finger as it moved across the page. When understanding finally settled, he smiled, quick and unguarded. "See?" she said softly. He nodded. "You're good at this." She laughed, surprised by the sound of it. It faded quickly, but the warmth remained. That night, after the child had gone to sleep, she lingered by the door longer than usual. Her coat was on. Her bag was over her shoulder. Still, she did not reach for the handle. "I don't know what this is," she said, not meeting his eyes. He stood a few steps away, giving her space. "We don't have to decide," he replied. She exhaled slowly. "You're not afraid?" "I am," he said honestly, "but not of this." She looked at him then, really looked, as if measuring the distance between who he was and what he offered. Whatever she saw there seemed to steady her. She left a moment later, the door closing softly behind her. He stood listening to the quiet that followed, the apartment holding its breath before settling again. He did not feel abandoned. He felt patient. The space between evenings had become something neither of them hurried through anymore. It held weight now. Meaning. The promise of something neither dared name, but both were careful not to break. The shift was subtle at first. He noticed it in the way the child began to glance toward the door more often in the evenings, as if listening for footsteps that did not always come, in the way she arrived with her shoulders already tense, the lines around her mouth slower to soften. Nothing had changed, exactly. Everything had. The world she belonged to had not loosened its grip simply because she had found a quieter place to stand. Calls followed her into the apartment now, taken just outside the door or on the balcony. Her voice lowered, but unmistakably firm. When she returned, she carried the residue of those conversations with her, an invisible weight she set down carefully, never quite releasing it. He watched without comment, but something in his posture grew more guarded. One evening, as the child worked through a math sheet at the table, she received a message that stilled her hand mid-motion. She read it once, then again. When she set the phone down, her expression was controlled, but the effort showed. He noticed. Of course he did. "Do you want tea?" he asked, giving her a note. "Yes," she said too quickly. He moved toward the kitchen, the familiar routine grounding him. He filled the kettle, set it on the stove, listened to the low rush of water and flame. Behind him, the child's pencil scratched steadily across paper. The ordinary sounds felt suddenly fragile. When the kettle whistled, he poured carefully, setting the mug in front of her without touching her hand. She wrapped her fingers around it, though she did not drink. "I don't want this to become a problem for you," she said quietly. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed, eyes on the floor between them. "It already is," he replied, not unkindly. She looked up sharply. "I haven't, I know," he said. "That's not what I mean." The child glanced up at the tension in their voices, eyes moving between them. He offered a small, reassuring smile, and the boy returned to his work, though his shoulders remained stiff. Later, after the child had gone to bed, the apartment felt smaller. The silence was not the easy one they had grown used to. It pressed closer, asking something of them both. "My life doesn't fit neatly here," she said finally. "No," he agreed, "and I can't make it smaller. Not entirely." He nodded once. "I wouldn't ask you to." She took a breath, steadying herself. "But I won't let it make this unsafe. For him." The emphasis mattered. He looked toward the hallway instinctively, the reflex of a man who measured risk in relation to someone else's sleep. "Safety isn't just about distance," he said. "It's about predictability, about knowing what follows." She swallowed. "I don't always know that myself." That was the truth, spoken plainly without defense. It hung between them, neither accusation nor apology. The next few days were quieter. She came less often, though she never stayed away too long. When she did arrive, she was careful, too careful. She asked before sitting, waited for permission that had never been required. The child noticed, confusion flickering across his face at the change in her demeanor. "Did I do something?" he asked one evening, blunt in the way children could afford to be. She knelt in front of him immediately, her expression open. "No," she said, "you didn't." "Then why are you sad?" She hesitated. "Then, sometimes grown-ups carry things they don't mean to." He considered this, then nodded, satisfied. "You can put them down here," he said, gesturing vaguely toward the apartment. Her eyes filled, just briefly, before she smiled. "I know." But knowing and doing were not the same. He felt himself pulling back in small ways. Not from her, exactly, but from the future he sensed hovering at the edge of their evenings. He stopped leaving the extra mug out. He packed lunches alone again, reclaiming the ritual as something contained. When she offered to help, he thanked her and declined. It was not punishment. It was protection. She understood this before he ever said it aloud. One night, she stood by the door longer than usual, her hand resting on the knob, her posture rigid with restraint. "If I stay," she said, "it will complicate things." He met her gaze steadily. "And if you leave, it will simplify them, but that doesn't make it better." They stood there, the distance between them carefully measured. There was no anger, no raised voices, only the shared understanding that something real required care, and care had a cost. "I won't disrupt his life," she said. "Not even for you." The words were meant as reassurance. Instead, they revealed the depth of what was at stake. He nodded. "Then we have to be honest about what we're offering." She exhaled slowly, the tension easing just a fraction. "I can offer presence," she said. "Consistency where it matters. I can choose this place, even when it's inconvenient." He studied her, weighing intention against impact, hope against habit. At last, he said, "Then choose it carefully." She left that night without lingering. He sat alone in the quiet that followed, the apartment echoing with absence, in a way it hadn't before. He did not regret the boundary he had drawn, but he felt the loss of what might have been, held at bay by responsibility. In the other room, the child slept on, unaware of the choices being shaped around him. His safety remained intact. That was the measure by which everything else was judged, and for now, that was enough. She came on a morning instead of an evening. The light was different, then paler, less forgiving. The apartment was quieter, too, emptied of the day's momentum. The child was at school. He stood at the kitchen counter rinsing a cup when he heard the knock. Not hesitant, not urgent, simple there. When he opened the door, she did not step forward right away. "I won't stay long," she said, not as a warning, as a courtesy. He stepped aside anyway. She removed her coat carefully, folding it over her arm instead of hanging it up. That, he noticed, the small signals people gave when they were preparing themselves for an ending. They sat at the table across from each other, the space between them familiar but newly charged. Sunlight cut across the surface, illuminating a faint scratch in the wood neither of them had ever bothered to fix. "I've thought about what you said," she began. "About safety, about predictability." He nodded once. He did not interrupt. "My life will always bring noise with it," she continued. "Attention, consequence. I can't promise I won't touch you, or him, in some indirect way." He waited. Silence had earned its place between them. "But I can promise how I move through it," she said. "What I shield, what I refuse to bring inside." He looked at her then, really looked. There was no armor in her posture today. No practiced composure. Just resolve, held carefully. "I won't drift in and out," she said. "If I'm here, I'm here. If I'm not, I'll say why. No disappearances. No half-presence." "That matters," he said quietly. She exhaled, a breath she seemed to have been holding for days. "I know I don't fit easily into this life, and I won't ask you to reshape it around me." He leaned back slightly, considering. "This life already has a shape," he said. "I protect it. That won't change. I don't want it to." They sat with that for a moment. Outside, a car passed. Somewhere in the building a door closed. Ordinary sounds, grounding. "There's something else," she said. Her fingers tightened briefly around the edge of the table, then relaxed. "I care for you. Not in a way that demands anything, but in a way that asks for honesty." He did not look away. "Then I'll be honest." She waited. "I don't have room for uncertainty where my son is concerned," he said. "I won't teach him to attach to someone who might have to leave for reasons he can't understand." Her throat worked as she swallowed. "I wouldn't ask him to," she said. "If there's a place for me, it's because I stay. And if staying becomes impossible, then I tell you before it becomes damage." The words were plain, unadorned. There was no romance in them, only commitment shaped by restraint. He considered the man he had been before, how often he had accepted, less because it was easier than hoping, how he had learned to build a life small enough to protect with his own hands. "You understand," he said slowly, "that this doesn't become something louder just because it's real." "I prefer it quiet," she replied. That earned the smallest hint of a smile from him. It faded quickly, but it had been there. "I won't move in," she added. "Not now, not until it makes sense for him. This remains his home." Relief crossed his face before he could stop it. "Thank you." She stood then, lifting her coat. The moment felt complete, not because everything had been resolved, but because nothing had been avoided. At the door, she paused. "May I come by this evening?" He thought of the child, of homework spread across the table, of dinner reheated and eaten slowly, of trust built not through words, but repetition. "Yes," he said, "you may." That evening, the child ran to the door when he heard her knock. "You're early," he said, pleased. "I chose to be," she replied. They ate together, the meal unremarkable in every way that mattered. The child talked about his day. She listened with full attention. He watched them both, the weight in his chest easing into something steadier. Later, when the child went to bed, She stayed seated at the table while he turned off lights. There was no tension now. No need to measure distance. This doesn't feel like a beginning, she said softly. No, he agreed. It feels like choosing to continue. She nodded, accepting that for what it was. Outside, the city carried on, indifferent as ever. Inside the apartment, something held, not fragile, not fixed, simply held by two people who had finally said what they could give and what they would not risk losing. The change did not arrive all at once. It settled gradually, the way weather did when the season turned without ceremony. No single day marked it. No declaration was made. Life simply began to arrange itself around a steadier center. She came regularly now, often at the same time each evening. Not early, not late. Predictable enough that the child started listening for her steps on the stairwell, counting them without realizing he was doing it. When she arrived, she removed her coat and hung it in the same place every time, careful not to displace what was already there. Dinner remained simple. Soup, rice, vegetables cut small enough for a child's patience. Sometimes she brought groceries, never anything extravagant, always asking first. He accepted them without comment, folding the gesture into routine rather than obligation. The child flourished in the consistency. He showed her his drawings without being prompted, asked her opinion on shoes, on words, on questions that mattered only because he asked them. She answered carefully, never overstepping, never deflecting. When he struggled, she waited for him to finish before offering help. When he succeeded, she noticed without praise that would feel too large. He watched it all with quiet attention. She learned the rhythms of the apartment, which floorboard creaked, how the radiator knocked when the heat came on too fast, that the hallway light needed a moment before it brightened fully. She adapted without complaint, as if learning a language spoken softly. On weekends, they walked together to the park. Nothing elaborate, just the three of them, moving at the child's pace. He rode ahead on his bike, stopping often to check if they were still watching. They always were. She did not speak about work unless asked. When calls came, she took them outside, returning with her composure intact but never bringing the edge back with her. Over time, even those interruptions grew fewer, not because her life had changed, but because she had decided where it would not intrude. One evening, as he folded laundry on the couch, she knelt on the floor with the child, helping him sort socks by color. The task took longer than necessary. No one hurried it. "You're good at being here," the child said suddenly. She paused, a sock held midair. "Being where?" "Here," he repeated, gesturing around the room. She looked at him, then at his father. Something passed between them, acknowledgment without possession. "I try," she said. Later, after the child had gone to bed, she remained seated beside him, the television muted, the room lit by a single lamp. There was comfort now in their proximity. No tension, no anticipation. "I used to think home was something you owned," she said quietly, "or controlled." He folded a shirt carefully before setting it aside. "It's something you maintain," he replied, "by showing up the same way even when it's inconvenient." She nodded, absorbing that. "I didn't know I wanted this." He did not respond right away. "Sometimes," he said eventually, "wanting comes after safety." She leaned back against the couch, considering that. "I feel like I can rest here." He glanced toward the hallway, the closed bedroom door. So does he. That mattered more than anything else. The season shifted. The air cooled. Jackets were brought out, and then heavier coats. She began leaving a pair of shoes by the door, not as a claim, but as an acknowledgement of return. He did not move them. One morning, as he packed lunches, she stood beside him, cutting fruit with quiet precision. They worked without speaking, bodies aware of each other's presence, without needing to mark it. This was not the life either of them had imagined. It was smaller, quieter, demanding in ways wealth and ambition never had been. But it held. It endured. Home, she was learning, did not announce itself. It revealed its shape through repetition, through care, through the choice to stay when no one was watching. And in that shape, all three of them fit. Morning arrived without urgency. The light crept in through the thin gap between curtain and wall, pale and patient. The apartment was quiet in the way it only ever was before the city fully woke a hush, shaped by familiarity rather than absence. He stood at the stove, stirring oatmeal slowly, the motion unhurried. The kettle hummed in the background, waiting. She sat at the small table barefoot, her coat nowhere in sight. This was new. Not her presence, she had been here many mornings now, but the ease of it, the way she leaned back in the chair, hands wrapped loosely around a mug, shoulders unguarded. There was no schedule pulling at her yet, no invisible line she seemed ready to cross at any moment. She had stayed the night, sleeping on the couch as she often did, but something about this morning felt different, less provisional. The child emerged from the hallway, hair rumpled, eyes still heavy. He padded toward the kitchen, rubbing at one cheek, then stopped short when he saw her. "You're still here," he said, pleased. "Yes," she replied simply. "I am." That seemed to satisfy him. He climbed into his chair and waited without asking, trusting that breakfast would appear as it always did. He accepted the bowl his father placed in front of him, then looked to her. "You can have some if you want," he offered, generous with what he assumed was plentiful. She smiled. "I already did. Thank you." They ate together, the sounds small and ordinary spoons against ceramic, the faint knock of the radiator warming up. Outside a bus passed, its noise distant and brief. Inside nothing competed for attention. After breakfast, the child gathered his things for school, moving with the efficiency of habit. She helped him with his jacket, fingers careful with the zipper. When he was ready, he hesitated, then leaned forward and hugged her quickly, the way children did when affection felt obvious and uncomplicated. "See you later," he said. "I'll be here," she answered. He accepted that without question. When the door closed behind them, the apartment settled again. She stood at the window, watching the two figures on the sidewalk below, father and son moving side by side, steps aligned. She felt something loosen in her chest, not ache, but release. He returned a few minutes later, the quiet shifting as the door closed behind him. He hung his jacket, then paused, taking her in as if seeing her clearly for the first time that day. "You don't have to rush," he said. "I know," she replied. "I'm not." They moved through the morning together without planning it. He washed dishes, she dried them. They spoke only when needed, the silence between them no longer asking to be filled. At one point, she reached for a mug from the cabinet and found it already warm, as if he had thought ahead without realizing it. She noticed that too. Near midday, her phone buzzed once on the table. She glanced at it, then turned it face down without checking. The gesture was small, but it carried weight. "I used to armor myself before mornings like this," she said quietly. "Prepare for impact. And now," she considered, "now I don't feel like I have to." He nodded, understanding without pressing. They stood near the window together, not touching, but close enough that the distance felt intentional rather than protective. Outside, the city continued as it always had, busy, demanding, indifferent. Inside, there was no need to perform. This was not a grand ending. There were no promises made aloud, no future outlined in detail. There would still be challenges, adjustments, days when the balance felt harder to keep, but there was something solid beneath it all now, something neither of them had to defend. She looked at him, then away, then back again. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For not stepping aside." He thought of the night that had set everything in motion. The instinct, the choice. He thought of the mornings that followed, of lunches packed and doors unlocked, of safety built one quiet decision at a time. "You stayed," he replied. That mattered. She nodded. The light shifted slightly as clouds moved overhead, the room dimming, then brightening again. The apartment held the change easily. So did they.